Welcome to Three Count Commentary. We got to talk about Ricky the Dragon Steamboat on A&E Biography. Fairly straightforward. There's still some things in this that I thought was very interesting, despite the fact that we know the story very well, especially if you watch the WWE documentary on Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. You already know the story. 2 hours on Ricky Steamboat was amazing. It was very good. One of the things that I think they highlighted quite a bit was his background and his family. It's for a long time, there have been little to no discussion about Ricky the Dragon Steamboat being Japanese or half Japanese. It's not something that is discussed often. In fact, I think it was mentioned in passing in his WWE documentary, but they never went into any detail like they did in this A&E biography about growing up in the shadows of World War II with a Japanese mother who was essentially disowned by her family and forced to live in the United States for 30 years without having any real contact with them. And how Ricky Steamboat himself had to reattach the family when he started making trips to Japan, working for Shohei Baba and All Japan Pro Wrestling, how he was the one who got the family back together and reconnected his mom with her side of the family. And he was an adult at this point. Like, that's a very powerful story. I mean, he put the word out and 200 people showed up that was related to his mom, found his mom's oldest sister, and they got into an argument less than a week after being there. And because he was stuck working in Japan and Baba had paid for the plane tickets and everything, he wasn't going to let his mom go back home. And they ended up working it out. And it brought him to tears. And I'm telling you, I was moved. It was an amazing story. That's the kind of stuff that I like to see. You know, Ricky Steamboat grows up in the shadows of World War II and makes the most of his opportunities. You know, growing up in the South, faced a lot of racism, was very interested in cars, which I also didn't. I had no idea that he was into cars. Now, him being half Japanese, I mean, you could look at him and tell. But I had no idea he was into cars. He was a gearhead. He's drag racing. I'm like, you get to know people so well with these biographies, and that's the real genius of them. That's really the value of these documentaries. In terms of his wrestling career, we already know the story. He trained by Vern Gagne, got into the wrestling into AWA, was brought over to Crockett by Ric Flair, became a top star there, then transitioned from tag teams to singles, from singles, rose up the card, and he was jump ship to the WWF, where he became Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. The huge match with Randy Savage at WrestleMania 3, him wanting time off because he's about to have a child. Now, there was a little tweak to the story that he asked for 2 weeks off. Then Vince didn't want the belt dormant for 2 weeks, so he dropped the belt to the Honky Tonk Man. And then he took 6 months, and then Vince pretty much never found anything for him to do afterwards and lost any interest in him. He went to WCW, did a little bit there, won the World Championship, essentially got stepped on with the Terry Funk reveal that he was going to be the next storyline for Ric Flair. It was interesting to see Ricky Steamboat's reaction to that he looked legitimately hurt that there was not, I mean, he had a 3-match series with Flair. That's, quite a bit. But he expected something else, I think. And for them to move on so quickly, it was almost like he didn't matter, and you could see that he was hurt. And you also see that he was kind of hurt also when he returned to the WWF, and he went through all the trouble of learning how to breathe fire, this is 1991 at this point, only for Vince to never do anything with him. And, that run is mostly he learned how to breathe fire, and that was it. But that's the Ricky Steamboat that I grew up with. I wasn't old enough to really understand the WrestleMania 3 Ricky Steamboat. I grew up with Ricky Steamboat blowing fire. All right. So that was cool as far as I was concerned. And then he goes back to WCW and He's working in the mid card, upper mid card, TV title, United States title divisions. Ends up suffering a back injury and has to retire. So it's a pretty straightforward story. Life after wrestling. His short comebacks here and there in the 2000s, wrestling Chris Jericho and almost getting killed by the Nexus. I was surprised they didn't mention his son wrestling. Richie Steamboat was involved with wrestling until about, I don't remember what year it was when he retired. It was before NXT really blew up. He injured his back, and his career was initially supposed to just be paused, but he just went off into drag racing and never came back. But he was a really highly touted recruit. There was a lot of people who liked his work. I thought he would have gotten a little bit of attention here just to talk about how, him working there, knowing, his dad's legacy and everything, how that might have had an impact on him. Of course, the documentary is about Ricky, but, it would have been nice to talk about Richie a little bit. But that was the only thing that I really missed. I like that Ricky's brother was in it. Seeing his family and learning his interests, that was the fun part for me. I already knew the wrestling story. He told the story of WrestleMania 3 100 times. I think the real story of Ricky Steamboat is that he was a guy who was very good, knew how good he was, and didn't settle for less. He wasn't getting what he felt like he deserved in WCW, and so he jumped ship to the WWF, was skyrocketed up the card to become the Intercontinental Champion, huge match at WrestleMania 3. Family life was complicated due to the amount of travel. Decided he was going to put his family first, which is what a man should do. Ended up suffering in terms of career, but he felt like he did the right thing. And I loved how he talked about in the documentary that as he was enjoying this time with his son, he kept saying to himself he would regret that he would miss this. He would miss birthdays. He would miss Christmases. He would miss the first steps and all these sorts of things that he would have missed had he been on the road. And he felt like he made the right decision. And as far as I know, he don't have any other children, so he certainly made the right decision. And even in terms of career, he didn't take less than he felt like he deserved. Now, there was a couple of things that I thought should have been mentioned in relation to him not feeling like he was booked fairly. He talked about Dusty Rhodes in an interview. There was a transcript on WrestleZone where he talked about why he left the Carolinas to go to the WWF in the 80s. And one of the things he felt weird about was Dusty Rhodes' booking. And he always felt that he was booked as the number 2 babyface behind Dusty. And that Dusty Rhodes would specifically book him in ways where he couldn't outshine Dusty. I think he gave some really good examples of him and Dusty would feud with the same people, but he would never beat those people and Dusty would. And that would give people the sense that he was always number 2 because he could never beat the guys that Dusty could beat. And he didn't like that. And you never hear about Ricky Steamboat complaining about finishes, complaining about booking, complaining about stories. You almost never hear, almost every time you see Ricky Steamboat, he's either telling straightforward his perspective of what happened and never, bitching, moaning, complaining, whining, or anything. Never one to talk about, his ego or anything like that. But it's so interesting how he was involved for so many things and how things didn't go the way that he thought. And he didn't go to the internet to complain about it, didn't whine about it. Another one that's in the same transcript is that he assumed that WrestleMania 4, he was going to wrestle Randy Savage and he was going to put Randy Savage over so that Randy could win the belt. That they was going to have the big rematch from WrestleMania 3 and that, there would be 2 rematches from WrestleMania 3 on WrestleMania 4. Of course, Hogan and Andre in round 1. And then in the next round, it would be Savage and Steamboat. That's what he thought. And it didn't happen, of course. He got time limit drawn out of the tournament with Greg the Hammer Valentine. But he never complained about it. He never bitched. Only time you hear about it is when he talked about it in this interview. So he is a guy who he takes himself seriously, but he's not a complainer. So when you hear that, he's looking for his main event spot, he felt like he's earned it. Now, I've seen on the internet people say, well, his matches with Flair didn't draw. That's why they moved on to Terry Funk, because the matches between Steamboat and Flair didn't draw. And maybe that was the case. Maybe that's why, Vince didn't go to him in 91 to be a top guy. You feel like maybe he was a flop champion in the NWA/WCW. But Steamboat is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Absolute legend. Gentleman. Tremendous guy. So learning about him was phenomenal. I wish we could have dug in a little bit more. I don't believe they actually even talked about his feud with Jake the Snake Roberts, which is the second most important storyline he was involved with in WWF. That made the Ricky Steamboat DVD set, but it didn't make this episode. That's when he got DDT'd on the floor and had a gigantic knot on his head because he thought he could protect himself from it. That's humorous. But they didn't use that one. But those two storylines, of course, are the main storylines he was involved with during his time in the WWF, was the Randy Savage storyline and the Jake Roberts storyline. The Jake Roberts storyline didn't make the cut this time, but it was fun. He was not a fan of losing the belt to Honky Tonk Man, which I'm glad to hear that. But it's just cool listening to Ricky Steamboat. I wish they could have gone into a little bit more detail on some things, but I really like that they spent a lot of time on his family, because that's something that they don't talk about a lot, especially for a guy his age, growing up when he grew up, with his background. So it was very special. Let me know what you guys think. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.